We have a bunch of new studies from the CDC on COVID-19 in America. I'm going to give you just the highlights, but I'm noticing an interesting pattern emerge from the research that I want to flag for you that raises some interesting questions about how we're addressing this pandemic. So I'm going to get to that in a minute, but let's just go through a couple of the highlights. First thing is about age disparity. So age disparity, how old is the typical person that's getting COVID-19 in the United States? The big takeaway from this research is that it's getting younger. So back in May, the median age for someone with a case of COVID was mid-40s. In the summer, it dropped to the late 30s. And this happened all over the country, not just in one region. But researchers did take a look at what exactly happened in the southern region of the United States, where we did see infections rise. And they noticed something interesting. When they saw infections rise in those under 30, they could see infections rise for those that are older anywhere between 4 days and 15 days. And so the big question is about how young people are leaders, not only leading and having a higher incidence of COVID-19 in certain communities, but then being a leading indicator of what to come, because we know that more serious cases of COVID-19 happen in those who tend to be older with pre-existing conditions. And this is a way for us to have an understanding about how to have the appropriate resources available to treat those that need it. So this was an interesting thing to note, that cases of COVID-19 in America are skewing younger. Now, we don't have any data for back to school, so you should know that. We're really just focusing on those between the ages of 20 and 30, or those between the ages of 20 and 40. And that's where we're seeing some of the rising numbers that are leading indicators or leading in certain communities. We'll see if that trend continues. In the meantime, let's take a look at the more serious cases for those that are younger, those under the age of 21. An interesting separate report was looking at this. Big takeaway from this report, small group, by the way, very small group number of those that have passed away that are under the age of 21 in America. This particular data set looked at 121 people. The big takeaway from this is that the more serious cases happened in minority communities by far. 78% of those who passed away under the age of 21 were Black, Hispanic, Native American. And so that's one of the big takeaways. The other big takeaway, those that had the most serious cases in that age group, 75% of them had at least one pre-existing condition. Of those pre-existing conditions, obesity was one of the leading conditions, as well as asthma. We're going to get back to that later. Let's talk a little bit about pregnancy. Pregnancy, like those that are young, we have a very small group that we're looking at. So just keep that in mind for any of these studies, because it's easy to kind of make huge generalizations, but the data is super limited. So we just had a little bit over 100 people we were looking at under the age of 21. We're looking at about 100 pregnant women that were hospitalized with COVID-19. Some of these women had no idea, by the way, that they had COVID-19. They were going in to have a baby, but they found out they were asymptomatic. In the cases where there were serious cases of COVID-19, one of the most notable things that stands out with this research is that women that had pre-pregnancy obesity were at a higher risk for a more serious case. And there was a concentration by research about pre-pregnancy obesity and diabetes being a major factor for pregnant women, as they're trying to put together an idea of how at risk pregnant women are. Okay, so those are the three main studies. Separately from all of this, late last week, the CDC released some new data on obesity in America. And the big takeaway from that data, this is all separate from COVID, this is data that's collected regularly, is that obesity rates are rising in the United States. We now have 12 states in America where more than 35% or more of the population in those states are obese. So this is a huge problem nationwide. If we look for racial disparities within this, you are seeing higher rates of obesity within Black and Hispanic communities as well. So what's the big takeaway from looking at all of this research? One, we're continuing to try to figure out how COVID-19 is spread and how age is a factor. But when we're looking at the risks for COVID-19, one of the patterns is emerging is the pre-existing condition that we all have talked a lot about prior to COVID-19, and that is obesity. And so today I'm listening into a Senate hearing. You have lawmakers asking all sorts of important questions about health policymakers with the U.S. government, covering important topics like masking, vaccines, social distancing. My question for you today is whether or not we're having the complete conversation we need to have about wellness overall in America. for keeping each other safe and healthy. So imagine if just as often we were talking about masking and vaccines, we were talking about obesity and trying to keep each other healthy overall, so we are prepared to handle this virus or the next one. Are we having the appropriate conversation? That's the question I'm asking. I don't have an answer, but that's the question I'm asking. I'm going to put all of these studies underneath this video on our website so you can check it out if you'd like to see the primary source. And of course, questions and comments, please let me know. I love hearing from you guys. All right. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon on smarternews.com.